September 1998. A conference room inside the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. Around the table sit the heads of nearly every major bank on Wall Street, called in overnight, most of them furious to be there. They have come to rescue a single hedge fund. Not a reckless one run by cowboys. The opposite. This fund was built by the most brilliant people in the history of finance. Two of them had won the Nobel Prize the year before. Their strategy was not a hunch or a gamble. It was mathematically proven, printed in the textbooks, designed from the ground up to be almost incapable of losing money. And in a little under 4 months, it had lost almost everything. This is the story of how the smartest people who ever traded made the single oldest mistake there is. To understand the fund, you start with one man, John Meriwether. Through the 1980s, at the investment bank Salomon Brothers, Meriwether ran the most profitable desk on all of Wall Street. It was called the Arbitrage Group, and it made the firm hundreds of millions of dollars a year by finding tiny errors in the bond market and betting on them. Meriwether himself was quiet, private, almost impossible to read. He rarely spoke, he never bragged, and inside the market, he was treated as something close to a genius. His traders worshipped him. Then, in 1991, it fell apart. One of his own traders was caught cheating, submitting false bids at United States Treasury auctions to corner the market. Meriwether went to his bosses and reported it. It did not save him. The scandal nearly destroyed Salomon Brothers. Warren Buffett had to step in personally to keep the firm alive, and Meriwether, the man who reported the wrongdoing, was pushed out the door. So in 1994, he did what a wounded legend does. He decided to build his own fund from nothing and to fill it with the greatest collection of financial minds ever assembled in a single room. He called it long-term capital management, and the people he recruited were not ordinary traders. Myron Scholes and Robert Merton were not just economists. They were the economists, the two men who had written the formula that tells the world how to price a financial option. It is called the Black-Scholes model, and it is not an exaggeration to say it created the modern derivatives industry. It is taught in every business school on earth. To have one of them at your fund would be a coup. Meriwether hired both. Then he added a former vice chairman of the Federal Reserve itself, a man who had helped run the American Central Bank. Think about what that meant. This was not really a hedge fund at all. It was the finest finance faculty ever assembled, a room full of people who had literally invented the rules everyone else was playing by, and they had been handed a trading account and told to go make money. Wall Street had never seen anything like it, and Wall Street was in awe. With names like that, raising money was almost insulting in how easy it was. But here's the part that tells you everything about the confidence in that room. Most funds beg for money and take anyone who offers it. Long-term capital did the opposite. The minimum investment was $10 million. Your money was locked away, untouchable, for 3 years. And the fees were far higher than the rest of the industry charged. 2% of everything you gave them every year, plus a full quarter of all the profits. Those were not the terms of people asking for a favor. Those were the terms of people who believed they were selling a sure thing and could name their price. And the world agreed. Banks invested. Wealthy families invested. Even foreign central banks, some of the most cautious institutions on the planet, handed over their money. Within its first months, the fund had raised more than $1.25 billion, one of the largest launches in the history of finance, and it had not placed a single trade yet. So what did they actually do with the money? The strategy had a complicated name, convergence arbitrage, but the idea underneath it is simple. Somewhere out in the market, at any given moment, two things that should cost almost exactly the same briefly do not. A brand new government bond might trade a tiny fraction richer than a nearly identical older one, just because it is newer and easier to buy and sell. The fund's insight was that this gap is temporary. Sooner or later, the two prices snap back together, they converge, and whoever bet on that pockets the difference. And the model said this was about as close to a sure thing as finance ever offers. But there is a catch, and the catch is the whole story. The gap is tiny. We are talking about pennies on the dollar. To turn pennies into the returns their investors expected, they had to do it at enormous scale, and that meant borrowing. Not a little, an astonishing amount. For every single dollar of their own money, they borrowed roughly 30 more from the banks. And the models had a comforting answer for the danger of all that borrowing. Because the fund held thousands of different tiny bets spread across dozens of countries and dozens of separate markets, the mathematics said they could not possibly all go wrong on the same day. Diversification, the formula promised, made the mountain of debt safe. At the peak, under $5 billion of actual capital was controlling more than $100 billion in bond positions and sitting underneath more than $1 trillion in derivative contracts. One of their own traders had a phrase for it. He said they were picking up nickels in front of a steamroller, and as long as the steamroller stayed far away, you could pick up an awful lot of nickels. And for a glorious few years, the steamroller stayed far away. The nickels piled up in the mountains. In its first full year, 1995, the fund returned 43% to its investors. The next year, 1996, 41%, and that was after all those enormous fees had already been taken out. Money like that had simply never been made this safely, this steadily, and the fund grew so large so fast that it developed a strange, almost comical problem. It ran out of good trades to make. By the end of 1997, it was managing over $7 billion, and it simply could not find enough of its safe little gaps to put all that money to work. So it did the unthinkable. It began forcing money back onto its own investors, handing back nearly $3 billion that people were begging to be allowed to keep inside. Being kicked out of long-term capital was treated as a personal insult. And then came the coronation. In October of 1997, Myron Scholes and Robert Merton were awarded the Nobel Prize in economics for the very mathematics the entire fund was built upon. Stop and think about what that did to the minds in that room. The machine that could not lose had just been blessed by the highest authority in the entire field. On paper, the men running it were now the officially certified smartest people alive. There was no one left on earth qualified to doubt them. And far more dangerously, there was no longer anyone inside that building willing to doubt themselves. But success on Wall Street is not a secret you can keep. Every bank in the world could see the fortune long-term capital was making, and it drove them a little insane that they could not see exactly how. So they did the only thing they could. They guessed, and they copied. By early 1998, the same clever convergence trades the fund had quietly pioneered were being run by half the trading desks in the world on the same towering piles of borrowed money. And that changed everything. The little pricing gaps that had always been so reliable began to thin out because now everyone was crowded onto the same side of the very same trades. The edge was being competed away. Worse, some of the biggest players, including Meriwether's old desk back at Salomon, decided to get out of these trades entirely. And when a giant sells, prices move hard against everyone still holding. And so, quietly, in the spring and early summer of 1998, for the very first time, the fund started losing money. Not dramatically, not yet, just a slow, steady, unfamiliar bleed. The models looked at it and saw nothing but noise, a run of bad luck that the mathematics promised would correct itself any day now. The partners were not worried. They were the smartest people alive, and their formula had never once been wrong. It had simply never yet been tested by the one event the formula was fundamentally unable to imagine. The one event the formula could not imagine was everyone in the world deciding to panic at the same time. Every single model the fund relied on rested quietly on one assumption: that markets stay more or less normal, that when one thing falls, something somewhere else rises to balance it out, that the whole world does not turn and stampede in the exact same direction on the exact same day. For decades, that assumption held. And then, on the 17th of August 1998, the government of Russia defaulted on its own debt. It simply announced that it would not pay back the people it owed. And in that single instant, every investor on the planet did the identical thing at the identical moment. They panicked, they ran for the safest thing they could find, United States government bonds, and they dumped absolutely everything else at any price they could get. The pricing gaps that long-term capital had bet its entire existence would gently close, every one of them, ripped violently open instead. The safe things got safer, the risky things got crushed, and the fund was on the losing side of nearly all of it, at 30-1. The models had assigned this exact outcome a probability so small that it was, for all practical purposes, zero. It was happening anyway. And here the genius of the fund became its death sentence. Because every one of their positions was really a version of the very same bet that calm would soon return, they all lost at once. There was no hedge, because the thing that was supposed to be the hedge was bleeding right alongside everything else. On a single trading day, the 21st of August, the fund lost more than $500 million in one day. By the end of that month, close to $2 billion was simply gone, and now the leverage that had built them turned around and trapped them. Their positions were so gigantic that if they tried to sell to cut their losses and get smaller, they would crash the very prices they were selling into and take even larger losses on the way out the door. They could not shrink. They were frozen inside their own trade, forced to just sit and watch it bleed, and it got worse. The bank that cleared their trades The one that processed and settled all of it behind the scenes grew frightened and began demanding more and more cash just to keep handling them, cash the fund was rapidly running out of. The partners stopped sleeping. They worked the phones around the clock, calling everyone they had ever known who had money. Warren Buffett, George Soros, the largest banks on Wall Street, and one after another, the conversations went nowhere and the offers fell apart. In a matter of a few short weeks, the fund's capital collapsed from $4.7 billion down to under $400 million. And every major bank on earth was standing on the other side of its trades, slowly realizing that if this fund went down, it might not go down alone. That was a true danger, and it was enormous, far bigger than one failed fund. Long-term capital was not off in a corner by itself. It was stitched into the very center of the entire financial system. More than $1 trillion of contracts tangled up with 16 of the largest banks in the world. If it simply collapsed and threw all that onto the market at once, it could drag those banks down with it, and nobody, not even the Federal Reserve, knew for certain how far the wreckage would spread. And so, the Federal Reserve did something it had never done before for a private hedge fund. On the 23rd of September, 1998, the president of the New York Fed summoned the heads of those banks into a single room, sat them down, and told them plainly to fix this themselves, tonight, before it infected everyone. There was shouting, there was a rival, last-minute offer from Warren Buffett that fell apart over the legal fine print. And then, in the space of just a few hours, 14 banks agreed to do the unthinkable. They put in $3.6 billion of their own money, took 90% of the fund, and agreed to quietly unwind the whole thing before the markets could open and panic. Only one bank at that table refused to pay a single cent. His name was Bear Stearns. Remember that name? 10 years later, in another crisis, Bear Stearns would be the one desperately needing a rescue. And that time, no one came. The fund was quietly taken apart over the following 2 years. The banks, in the end, got most of their money back, but the investors were nearly wiped out. And so, poetically, were the partners themselves who had believed in the machine so completely that they had left most of their own personal fortunes locked inside it, certain it could never fail. Some of the most celebrated financial minds of an entire generation walked away from the wreckage, having lost very nearly everything they personally owned. The deepest damage, though, was not on anyone's balance sheet. Alan Greenspan, the chairman of the Federal Reserve, and his colleagues went before the United States Congress to defend organizing that rescue, and a single hard question followed them out of that hearing room and has never once gone away. If Wall Street learns that the government will quietly step in to catch them whenever the smartest, biggest players get themselves into enough trouble, then what, exactly, is left to stop them from doing it all over again, only bigger? Economists have a cold little name for that problem. They call it moral hazard. And it was not just a theory. John Merriweather, the quiet genius at the center of it all, started another hedge fund the very next year. And that one too eventually blew up. And 10 years later, in 2008, the entire global financial system would borrow far too much, bet everything on the assumption that the good times would simply keep rolling, and very nearly collapse for precisely, exactly the same reason. No crime was ever charged. No one went to prison. That was never the mystery of this case. The mystery is how the single smartest group of people who ever sat down to trade managed to make the oldest mistake there is. They built a beautiful machine that quietly assumed the future would always look like the past. They borrowed $30 for every one they actually had, and then they bet all of it, everything, on the world agreeing to stay calm. The Nobel Prize came in 1997. The collapse came in 1998, $4.6 billion gone in 4 months. And the strangest part, the part that makes this a cold case that never really closes, is that this exact lesson costs the same staggering amount every single time it is taught, and almost no one, in the end, ever seems willing to buy it. Because there is no formula, there has never been a formula for the day the whole world decides to panic at once. Case Fin 002. Closed.